Whale mission ends tragically. Timmy, the humpback whale, found dead near Danish island after dramatic German rescue mission. A humpback whale that captured international attention after becoming stranded along Germany's Baltic coast has been found dead near a Danish island, bringing a heartbreaking end to one of Europe's most debated wildlife rescue operations. Now let's take a deeper look and uncover every layer of this story on our AI podcast.
Imagine a 30-ton humpback whale strapped into this custom water-filled barge, right? And it's being slowly towed across the Baltic Sea while literally millions of people are watching on their phones.
It sounds like this ultimate, triumph of human compassion.
Exactly. It's like an absolute feel-good movie just waiting to happen. But if you were to look behind the cameras, you'd find the actual marine biologists watching that exact same live stream in absolute horror.
Total panic.
Yeah. So welcome to a deep dive into an article titled The Final Voyage of Timmy the Humpback Whale. Our mission today is to really explore this story that recently captivated and honestly completely divided Europe.
Right, because it brings up some really tough questions.
It really does. We're going to use this one highly publicized event to unpack a profound and, frankly, deeply uncomfortable dilemma. Like, at what point does our human urge to save wildlife actually cross the line into causing more harm? Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, to really understand how we get to a massive whale on a barge, we have to start back on March 23rd. This was on Germany's Baltic Sea coast.
Oh, right. Near Lübeck Bay, I think?
Yeah, specifically near the island of Pol, close to Timmendorfer Beach. A young humpback whale basically got trapped on a shallow sandbank. And, the moment a wild animal enters the human field of vision in distress, the whole dynamic shifts.
Totally. Because the media immediately gave the whale a name. Two names, actually. Timmy and Hope.
Right. Which changes everything.
Because naming a wild animal is always that first step in turning a biological event into this human narrative. Suddenly you aren't just looking at a stranded marine mammal. You are looking at a character in a drama.
And the drama here was incredibly intense. The animal actually managed to free itself initially.
Wait, really? It got out?
It did, but the water in that bay is just incredibly shallow. So the whale was likely so disoriented that it just kept getting caught on the sandbanks over and over again.
Man, that sounds exhausting.
It is. You have authorities, local rescue teams, and volunteers spending weeks out there in the freezing surf. They are trying acoustic deterrents. They are trying boats, just trying everything to guide this exhausted animal back to deeper water.
But then it all just stops.
Yeah.
Right.
Eventually, the authorities made a decision that caused absolute outrage online. They stopped, they pulled the teams back, and basically abandoned active intervention.
Which goes against every instinct we have. I mean, the authorities were essentially looking at a patient whose internal organs were failing.
Yeah.
I think the best way for you listening to wrap your head around this is to compare it to a human medical setting.
That's a really good analogy.
Like, think of that agonizing moment when a medical team has to decide to stop CPR on a severely compromised patient. At a certain point, the intervention itself isn't saving a life. It's just a mechanical process that is prolonging the suffering.
Exactly.
So since it goes against every human instinct to just watch an animal struggle, how do authorities actually make that agonizing call?
Well, the experts on the ground warned that the whale was simply too weak to survive. Continuing to chase it with boats or, drag it toward deeper channels was going to cause massive spikes in stress hormones.
Was it bad?
Very bad. Those spikes can be lethal on their own. But to really grasp why the authorities backed off, you have to look at the anatomy of a humpback whale and what happens to it outside of deep water.
Right, because they're not built for land at all.
Not even a little bit. We think of whales as these invincible leviathans, but their bodies are entirely dependent on the displacement of water to survive. A land mammal, like an elephant, has an incredibly dense, rigid skeletal structure to fight gravity.
To hold itself up.
Right. A whale does not. Their rib cages are actually quite flexible. That's what allows their lungs to compress safely when they dive to extreme depths.
Oh, wow. So they are built to withstand immense pressure from the outside in, but they have absolutely no structural defense against gravity pulling them down.
Exactly. Without the buoyancy of the ocean supporting those 30 tons of blubber and muscle, gravity effectively turns the whale's own body weight into a weapon.
That's terrifying.
The flexible rib cage bows inward. The lungs are literally crushed under the weight of the animal's own back. The liver and intestines are severely compressed, which cuts off blood flow. Simply taking a breath requires the whale to lift thousands of pounds of its own flesh.
So they're just suffocating under their own weight.
Yeah, they enter this devastating exhaustion loop. A humpback repeatedly stranding itself and fighting the sand is burning through energy reserves at an astronomical rate.
Right.
Their massive muscles flood with lactic acid, which they can't flush out properly because their cardiovascular system is already failing under the crush of gravity.
So the authorities realized they'd crossed that line. They knew intervention was just making it worse.
The biological point of no return had been crossed. The authorities recognized that letting nature take its course was the most humane option left on the table.
But stepping back creates a vacuum.
It does.
Mhm.
Millions of people are emotionally invested in Timmy. They are constantly refreshing their feeds, looking for a happy ending, and nature abhors a vacuum.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the official rescue gets called off. But the story is far from over.
Right.
2 German entrepreneurs, Karin Walter Momert and Walter Gunz, decide they simply will not accept this outcome. They step right into that vacuum with a massive influx of private funding to launch a rogue final rescue mission.
This requires a moment to appreciate the sheer mechanical engineering of what they actually attempted. You don't just put a leash on a humpback whale.
No, obviously not.
They brought in a specialized massive barge named the Fortuna B, but a standard barge is just a flat deck of steel. If you put a whale on that, you crush it instantly, as we just discussed.
I guess it's the gravity issue.
Exactly. So they had to heavily modify this vessel. They essentially turned the Fortuna B into a giant floating bathtub.
A bathtub for a whale.
Yeah. They had to pump thousands of gallons of seawater into the holding area just to provide enough artificial buoyancy to keep the whale's organs from collapsing during transit.
And the logistics of getting the animal into that barge are mind-boggling. I mean, you're dealing with an animal that is either thrashing in panic, which could easily kill a human rescue worker, or it's dangerously lethargic.
Both of which are nightmares for a rescue crew.
You have to slip specialized marine slings under 30 tons of slippery, delicate skin without slicing into the blubber. You have to coordinate heavy lifting cranes on the open water and then gently lower this creature into a confined metal box.
And they also managed to fit the whale with a satellite tracking device during this chaos.
Which is another whole thing.
It is. Attaching a tracking tag to a wild whale involved piercing the thick layer of blubber with a specialized dart or pole. Under normal circumstances, a healthy whale's immune system handles that minor wound without issue.
Right, it's basically like a piercing.
Yeah, but on a severely compromised, exhausted animal, any puncture becomes a massive vector for infection. But despite all these risks, they managed to load the whale, secure it, and a tugboat began towing the Fortuna B out of the Baltic Sea, guiding it toward the open waters of the North Sea in early May.
From a public relations standpoint, this looked like an absolute masterpiece. You have the ultimate underdog story playing out in real time.
It was everywhere.
Mecklenburg-Vorpommern's environment minister, Till Backhouse, even came out and gave a speech praising the entire operation. He called it a major success and stated it was an example for Germany of what can be done.
Which is a very bold claim.
Right, wait.
Yeah.
The minister is calling this a major success, but let's look at what actually happened here. We utilized incredible technology and spent a fortune to hoist a dying animal onto a boat.
Yes.
Was this an actual victory for the whale? Or were we just spending millions to move the animal somewhere we couldn't see it die?
Yeah.
It feels less like ecological conservation and more like a highly funded spectacle to soothe the human conscience.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you are highlighting the central danger of modern wildlife management. We have reached an era where technology allows us to do almost anything.
We can do pretty much whatever we want.
Exactly. We can airlift sedated rhinos upside down from helicopters. We can track great white sharks from space. We can build custom aquatic barges for humpback whales. But having the capability does not automatically provide the ethical justification to use it.
Just because we have the crane doesn't mean we should lift the whale.
Perfectly said. When private wealth and public emotion can completely override scientific consensus, you fundamentally undermine the concept of ecology.
Wow.
You are no longer managing natural ecosystems. You are directing reality television. The metrics for success shift from what is biologically sound for this species to what generates the most positive social media engagement.
And the scientists who dedicate their lives to studying marine mammals were watching this entire reality show unfold, and they were sounding alarm bells at top volume.
They absolutely were.
The German Oceanographic Museum came forward to bluntly warn that the whale was in such a weakened state that it was at a very high risk of drowning upon release.
The concept of a marine animal drowning always confuses people, but whales are mammals. They do not have gills.
They still have to breathe air.
Yes, they have to actively swim to the surface, break the tension of the water, and consciously open their blowhole to breathe. It takes a massive amount of muscular energy.
Which this whale didn't have.
Right. If a whale is so exhausted from stranding, the lactic acid buildup, and the trauma of being hoisted onto a barge that it can no longer generate the thrust to reach the surface, it inhales seawater and drowns, exactly like a human would.
Man, that's grim. And the Whale and Dolphin Conservation Group also stepped in, adding an entirely different, incredibly grim layer to the situation.
The skin issue.
Yeah. They pointed out that the whale had likely suffered severe, irreversible skin damage. This wasn't just from scraping against the sandbars in Lübeck Bay, but from the actual water it was swimming in.
Because the Baltic Sea is a unique body of water, it has incredibly low salinity levels compared to the open ocean where humpback whales normally thrive.
It's just not salty enough.
No, it is essentially a brackish sea, heavily diluted by freshwater rivers.
This detail really caught me off guard during our research. To understand why a lack of salt is so deadly to a whale, imagine a human being stranded near the summit of Mount Everest, up in the death zone.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Right. You can survive there for a very brief window. But human biology is not built to function at that altitude. The longer you stay in an environment that is fundamentally lacking something your cells require, in our case, atmospheric pressure and oxygen, but in the whale's case, dissolved salt, your body just begins to break down.
It fails.
Yeah. It isn't just about the whale being stuck in a bad location. The water itself was actively destroying the animal's cellular structure.
What's fascinating here is how your Everest analogy translates to the microscopic level of marine biology. In a low salinity environment, a marine mammal's skin undergoes massive osmotic stress.
Osmotic stress.
Yeah. A whale's cells are adapted to a highly salty environment. When you place those salty cells into relatively fresh water, the laws of osmosis dictate that the fresh water will rush into the cells to try and balance the salt concentration.
Oh, so the water is forcing its way in?
Exactly. The whale's skin cells literally absorb water until they swell up and rupture.
The cells are bursting from the inside out.
Yes. Entire layers of the whale's epidermis begin to die and slow off in massive sheets. It exposes the underlying tissue to bacterial infections, compounded by the fact that the animal's immune system is completely suppressed by stress.
So the public is cheering for this brave, anthropomorphized character named Timmy sailing toward freedom on the Fortuna B.
And ignoring the reality.
Right. Because the hard, unemotional reality of biology is that this animal is sitting in a tank, its organs compromised, its muscles failing, and its skin peeling off.
It's incredibly sad.
The critics vehemently argued that the prolonged rescue didn't save the whale. It just massively increased and extended its agony. Which brings us to the tragic and, frankly, inevitable conclusion of the voyage.
Sadly, yes.
All of those stark scientific warnings that were drowned out by the cheering crowds, they proved to be devastatingly accurate.
They did.
On a Thursday, a massive whale carcass was discovered floating near the Danish island of Anholt, which sits right in the waterway between Denmark and Sweden.
Initially, there was this tiny sliver of hopeful denial from the public. People wondered if it might be a different humpback whale entirely.
Because no one wanted to believe it.
Right. But by Saturday, the weather conditions improved enough for the Danish Environmental Protection Agency to send a team out onto the water. They managed to physically retrieve the satellite tracking device from the decomposing blubber of the carcass.
So they checked the data.
And the data definitively confirmed it. It was the same whale. The private rescue mission hadn't saved the animal. The Fortuna B had simply spent millions of dollars to transport a dying creature to a different zip code to die out of sight.
Wow. So what does this all mean for the local area? Like, can people go see it, or is it dangerous? You have a 30-ton carcass floating near a populated European island.
Well, Danish authorities immediately announced they have absolutely no plans to remove the body.
Really?
And they aren't going to perform a necropsy to determine the exact biological cause of death either. They stated that out where it's currently floating, the carcass doesn't pose a broad environmental threat.
So it's just going to stay there?
Yes. The marine ecosystem, the sharks, the crabs, the benthic scavengers, they will naturally reclaim those thousands of pounds of biomass. But they did issue a massive urgent warning to the public to stay far, far away from the whale.
Which makes sense.
This raises an important question about how our highly populated modern society deals with the literal physical fallout of nature when it happens in our backyard. The Danish officials weren't just trying to protect the dignity of the animal, they were trying to protect the public from very real, very visceral dangers.
Let me guess. Disease.
That's the first danger, yes, the microscopic one. Decomposing marine mammals are massive biohazards. They are breeding grounds for zoonotic diseases.
Like pathogens that can jump the species barrier from marine animals directly to humans.
Exactly.
Things like brucellosis or leptospirosis.
Exactly those. If a curious tourist takes a boat out and touches the carcass, or even breathes in the aerosolized bacteria spraying off the decaying tissue in the wind, they are exposing themselves to severe, potentially life-threatening bacterial infections.
So do not pet the dead whale.
Definitely do not pet the dead whale.
That seems like a very reasonable boundary.
Yeah.
But there was a second warning issued by the Danish authorities. That sounds like a joke until you realize the physics behind it.
Oh, the explosion risk.
Yes. They warned boaters to stay away because the whale might explode. That sounds absurd, but whale explosions are a very real, incredibly dangerous phenomenon.
They absolutely are. To understand the mechanics of a ticking time bomb whale, you have to look at the blubber. A humpback is encased in a massive, thick layer of fat designed to be the ultimate thermal insulator.
Because the ocean is freezing.
Right. It keeps the whale's core temperature stable in the freezing depths. It traps heat perfectly.
But when the whale dies, that blubber just keeps doing its job. It traps everything inside.
The moment the animal dies, the bacteria that normally live harmlessly in its gut begin to multiply rapidly and consume the internal organs. This decomposition process produces massive volumes of gas, primarily methane and hydrogen sulfide.
Oh man, that's a bad combination.
It is, but because that thick layer of blubber is so incredibly tough and insulating, the gas cannot easily escape. The whale essentially transforms into a sealed organic pressure cooker.
The sheer visual of that is terrifying. The body just bloats, expanding larger and larger as the internal gases build up against the skin.
The internal pressure reaches astronomical levels. If a human were to approach it in a boat and poke it with a boat hook, or if a scavenger bites it, or even if the skin simply degrades enough under the sun to reach a critical failure point, the rupture is catastrophic.
Catastrophic how?
It doesn't just slowly hiss out air like a deflating tire. It is a violent, supersonic explosion.
Wait, supersonic?
Yes. It blasts toxic gas, rotting blood, and massive chunks of decaying internal organs outward at speeds that can easily capsize a small boat or cause fatal blunt force trauma to anyone standing nearby.
That is insane. So the final chapter of this highly romanticized rescue story isn't a triumphant leap into the sunset. It is a biohazardous, potentially explosive carcass floating in the sea, requiring government warnings to keep the public safe. Nature isn't a scripted movie.
No, it's really not.
It is raw, it is messy, and it operates entirely without sentimentality.
We project our human narratives onto nature, but nature doesn't care about our storylines. It just follows the laws of physics and biology.
Which brings us right back to you, listening to this deep dive. Why does the fate of a stranded whale in the Baltic Sea matter to your daily life? I think the story of Timmy is ultimately a mirror. It reflects our own deep ingrained empathy. We are a species that cares.
We want to help.
We do. When we see a creature in pain, our evolutionary instinct kicks in. We want to fix it. We want to be the hero who saves the day. But as we've seen with the Fortuna bee, that heroic impulse can blind us entirely to the grim biological facts.
It's a dangerous blind spot.
So the next time you are scrolling through your feed and you see one of those viral videos of people dragging a stranded dolphin back into the surf or pulling an animal out of the mud while emotional music plays in the background, take a pause.
Look critically at what's really happening.
Exactly. Look past the feel-good narrative of the humans in the video and consider the unseen realities. Consider the cellular stress, the exhaustion loop, and the ethical costs of intervention.
Learning to separate our human desire to feel helpful from what actually serves the ecological health of the animal is honestly one of the hardest lessons in modern conservation.
It really is. Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We started this deep dive talking about the clear, precise lines of human medicine. But given that modern technology now allows us to intervene in nature on a scale previously unimaginable, literally loading 30-ton whales onto custom tracking barges, at what point does our technological ability to save an animal actually strip away its fundamental right to a natural death?
That's the real dilemma.
If true compassion sometimes means doing absolutely nothing, How do we rewire our highly empathetic human brains to accept that inaction is sometimes the most humane choice of all? It's a complex question with no easy answers. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Okay, one question for you. Should humans continue intervening in large-scale wildlife rescue missions when marine experts warn that the stress, injuries, and environmental conditions may ultimately reduce the animal's survival chances? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.